And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. In the Manitoba legislature in 1990, MLA Elijah Harper clutched an eagle feather as he blocked the passage of the Meech Lake Accord, the agreement that had been negotiated between Ottawa and the provinces to bring Quebec into the constitutional fold. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1990.
Harper's fight for Native recognition was a lightning rod for Native resentment. The end of Meech Lake signaled the beginning of Native solidarity.
Does the Honourable the First Minister have leave? Agreed? No? Leave is denied.
With the death of Meech Lake, Brian Mulrooney was to witness boiling Native resentment across the country. It was to be a summer of angry Native protests. Fuel resentment against our Aboriginal peoples.
You know, it's hard to look the person who supports roadblock in the face without saying something rude and nasty to them. It's very hard to look some people in the face.
And financially break innocent victims. But you're not going to lose this place.
In 2 more weeks I could, yeah.
It's that bad.
It's that bad. I have no more money left. And neither does anybody in this town.
Native Indians in British Columbia have been fighting federal and provincial governments for years. But until this summer, there has been questionable headway, limited interest. When Native protests broke out across the province this summer, they were in support of the Oka situation in Quebec. But over the weeks, the issue has changed from Oka to treaties, Aboriginal title, past wrongs by federal and provincial governments, and environmental concerns. The issues have changed, the protests have spread, and anger has erupted. Native rail and road blockades littered the province during July and August, and court injunctions led to scores of Natives being arrested.
The resentments are certainly there on a very broad base, whether it's education, economic status, what have you. Historical treatment, there's a very strong sense of grievance there, but it's focused on the land issue. The land issue has remained the main issue from the very beginning of white contact in this province. That's a rather remarkable thing.
The Duffy Lake roadblock has severed the town of Pemberton from the interior of this province for 11 weeks. Only Native supporters can pass through this makeshift barrier, but there are few supporters now. The blockade has split Native families.
And the only person who verbally attacked me down there was my sister. She said, I didn't know what I was doing, that I was going to allow our town to become a municipality, that, what else? She said I wasn't her sister anymore.
Are you in battle with your family?
Just one, my older brother.
Are you worried about physical confrontation when you go home? Is that a concern?
I am. It is, must be. The first time that I was harassed going through there was when I drove Maisie's truck back from after it was hit. And yeah, like I said, it's an aggressive act.
Natives are leery to discuss family feuds. Neighbors, however, are not.
I think it's torn Mount Currie apart is what it's done. You know, they've got family against family, friends against friends, you know. And in a small community like this, that's a disaster.
There has already been violence between Natives, but there's worry another kind of violence could erupt any day. Violence from neighboring Pemberton, where businesses are losing thousands of dollars to the roadblock.
And I'm talking real violence. You know, I think a lot more people are going to get involved. And, you know, the non-Native people have been pretty laid back so far, but, you know, they're getting pushed. Their jobs, you know, are gone. And
Sharon, do you really think there'd be violence here in this tiny little community?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind it's going to happen.
Yes, there's been some awful things said. Really bad. Some things I just wouldn't care to repeat.
They pretty well function around tax dollars.
Yes, and, you know, some of the comments towards heavy violence, and I try to stay away from it. I'm a bit of a pacifist.
After 8 years in Pemberton, Brent Grimm and his family are leaving town. He was going to retire here. He blames the roadblock and the government for their decision.
Like, I don't even know who I'm mad at anymore.
Rose Nemec has gone from 13 employees to 5.
Give us a break. I mean, we didn't do this to you. You know, like, it's not my fault that somebody signed a piece of paper and said you can't have this land no more. You know, but I mean, by rights, they are living on the best land in this valley. They've got the primest farmland here.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. When Europeans explored Canada, they found all regions occupied by native peoples they called Indians because the first explorers thought they had reached the East Indies. The arrival of European traders, missionaries, soldiers, and colonists changed the native way of life forever. Let us return to the archives to discover what else came on British ships.
For thousands of years they lived here, in the place that became British Columbia. They lived on the land, but did they own it? Well, the British government seemed to think so as early as 227 years ago. Not long after the first British ships came British law. In 1763, a royal proclamation declared the country to be British territory, but recognized that the land itself was owned by the Indians. It said any lands not having been ceded to or purchased by us are reserved to them. The meaning then was clear. If white settlers were to have land, they would have to get it from the Indians, by purchase or by treaty. Today, Musqueam elder Dominic Point takes us to his fishboat, moored on the riverbank where his people have always lived.
Well, I guess I grew up with it. Ever since I came to my senses, when they practice on the canoe, my dad was a skipper, and I'd come down and watch him get on the canoe, and away they go.
But the land Point remembers from his childhood is not the land of his ancestors. It's the land left over after the white men came.
They just came here, put up their buildings. Who did they ask? Nobody. Well, they just say this is a crown land. We can do as we please with it.
Point lives on a reserve of only 416 acres, and yet the Musqueams used to occupy everything from the mouth of the Fraser to New Westminster and north to Burrard Inlet. So what happened? To understand that, we must look back to the middle of the last century and to BC's first governor, Sir James Douglas. Officially, he recognized the principle of native ownership established by the Royal Proclamation, and he began signing treaties with the Indians. But he had his own idea of how the new colony should develop. He favored full assimilation. He believed Indians should be treated just the same as white settlers, that they should be just like other British subjects, given full voting rights, and the right to homestead.
His vision was no mean-spirited vision at all. He thought the Indians would be best off as equals, with equal rights with whites, which meant, in his policy, homesteading rights for Indians.
Douglas's vision was impractical, of course. While he tried to point the way to native homesteading, he failed to take into account one thing that was absolutely vital to Indian society: the extent to which the people felt tied to their ancestral lands. Indians weren't going to pack up and move to new land. They had land already. It was already home. But home changed forever because of the Douglas Plan. Now, in other provinces, when land was being set aside for Indian reserves, it took into account things vital to the native economy, land for hunting and fishing. But in BC, where Douglas and the colonial government thought that reserves would become obsolete when natives did go homesteading, the boundaries were drawn very tightly, just around the settlements. As a result, in this province, we now have some 1,600 Indian reserves, most of them tiny. Douglas thought that treaties, too, would become irrelevant. So after making a few of them on Vancouver Island, he stopped making any more. Then Sir James Douglas was replaced by Joseph Trutch, and everything changed for BC's Indians. Paul Tennant, author of a new book on the native land issue, says Trutch had a very different attitude toward the natives.
His own letters and his own statements clearly indicate a man who was contemptuous of Indians, believed in white racial superiority, compared Indians to beasts, called them savages in a very pejorative way, saw Indians as simply like other wild animals, and so looked upon the British Columbia territory as having been essentially empty before whites arrived.
Tennant says it was not until then that whites first rejected the concept of Aboriginal title, a concept the BC government still refuses to accept. So BC's Indians fell through the crack between two very different visions of their future. Douglas left them without treaties and with tiny reserves because he thought they would go homesteading. Then Trutch and the legislature of the day took away their right to homestead and simply ignored the land issue, meaning there were still no treaties. And to this day, nothing has been done to extinguish Aboriginal title. And now, back on the Musqueam Reserve, Dominic Point wonders how his people have been left out of Canada's cultural mosaic.
If you flew the proper flag, it'll be like a patch quilt of all the different nationalities, not just a maple leaf.
And do you think your nationality has been shortchanged?
Oh, you know yourself that we're not being treated right.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Because the Royal Proclamation of 1763 stated that the Crown must negotiate and sign treaties with Indigenous people before land could be ceded to the colony, the number of treaties were negotiated in most parts of the Prairie provinces. The government of the colony of British Columbia, however, failed to negotiate many treaties, and as a result, most of the province land was not covered by treaties. Let us return to the archives as Paul Tennant shares his thoughts.
Those who raise these questions are basically hostile to claims, and they raise this as a preposterous possibility. But I think underlying it, it shows what their deep fears are. They really are fearing that Indians will treat them the way the original whites treated Indians.
Now, those people in the audience that think that we're after your fee simple title, I mean, put that out of your mind, because we simply are not interested in displacing people who are presently on the land.
Much of the uncertainty about land claims comes from the fact that there seems to be no one set of demands. But there are no fewer than 27 Indian nations in BC, and each of them will have different needs when it comes to reaching a settlement. But if negotiating claims will be complicated, the principle behind them is simplicity itself, to people like Musqueam elder Dominic Point.
We got to settle with the white man. We got to be satisfied. We got to agree with one another and be happy.
But there are a couple of hurdles on the road to happiness. For one thing, much of government thinking is still devoted to extinguishing Aboriginal title. In other words, coming up with a deal that would see natives give up their ownership of most of the land.
I think that British Columbians will insist on a settlement that has some certainty to it.
I get the impression that what government would like to do is buy the province from you. Is it for sale?
No, the province is not for sale.
Bill Wilson says natives don't want to give up title, just negotiate the use of the land. And he says that relationship may have to be renegotiated in the future.
Because the next generation of non-Indian people dealing with the next generation of Indian people are going to have their own relationship. And it's one that is a dynamic. It doesn't die as the treaties may have.
Another obstacle in the way of a land claim settlement is the very recognition of Aboriginal title itself.
I don't believe that it would be prudent for our government to recognize Aboriginal title. And the reason that I say that is that there is no definition of Aboriginal title which is widely accepted by Indian people.
But government and natives do share a general understanding of 4 things that a settlement must do. So here is a rough outline of a possible future land claims deal. First of all, there will be more land under the direct ownership and control of Indians. Secondly, there will be some kind of payment to compensate natives for the land they will not get back. Thirdly, there will be some kind of share in BC's resource wealth, some control over resource industries. And there must be some kind of self-government, native control over native institutions. Because the 2 sides disagree, they may simply leave out Aboriginal title, government never officially recognizing it, Indians never conceding it. And if Indians win the resource control they are seeking, they may trade off some or all of the direct support they now get from the federal government. Serious negotiations now may still take 10 or 15 years to produce a deal. But all sides agree there may never be a better time to talk.
We have generations of Indian leaders coming that understand our history, that may very well not be as moderate or positive about these as I am, but I hope that we can resolve it, before we have to have those kind of angry confrontations.
Resolve it before a new generation takes over and before an older generation is gone.
You're 74?
74, yeah.
Do you think you're going to see this settled?
I kind of hope that I will. Maybe I'd approach the government and ask them to hurry up.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The oldest finds in the area of Tsawwassen First Nation settled by means of radiocarbon dated to about 2260 BC. In 1958, the BC provincial government built a BC Ferries Terminal in Tsawwassen for their ferries. For this purpose, a Tsawwassen First Nation longhouse was demolished. In this final segment of Open Connection, we return to the archives to Chief Tony Jacobs.
We know that relying on the federal government doesn't work, so that's why we want to do development so that we can create our own financing and do our own programs, create our own housing. The way it sits right now, we wait for housing from Indian Affairs, and sometimes we build 1 or 2 houses a year, and you just can't do that.
On the surface, it appears natives receive more benefits than non-natives. Therefore, they should have a better chance for success. But a closer look at Native society shows tax breaks and subsidies don't necessarily buy prosperity. On the streets of the downtown east side, there is evidence of a culture that is suffering. Most natives are poor. The average income on reserves is half the national poverty level. There's a tremendous dependency on welfare. Indian Affairs reports 40% of reserve residents in BC receive welfare, and the figure is higher off reserves. While natives constitute about 3% of BC's population, they make up 16% of the population in prisons. Most of the offenses are alcohol-related, and the suicide rate amongst natives is 6 times that of the rest of Canada.
Day-to-day control by outside officials obviously saps morale, produces widespread depression, lack of confidence. The school system was tied in to do just the same thing, and nothing replaced the culture that was removed in many individuals' cases. So there were a lot of lost individuals. That's a tragedy, but that's reality.
Indian and Northern Affairs argues the department can loosen its control only when the Indian Act, a federal statutory document, is updated.
One might argue that the Act is outdated, but in the absence of anything to replace it, the Act exists, and the department has to exist to administer the provisions of the Act.
But Native leaders complain the average salary at the department is $56,000 a year, and that too much of the annual $4 billion budget goes toward fueling the huge bureaucracy.
Indian people have gone from a situation of total and absolute independence based on renewable natural resources to almost a situation of dependency on the Department of Indian Affairs because we have been alienated from the renewable natural resource. The land claims issue clearly is about plugging us back into those renewable natural resources to provide the fuel to ensure that our economy, our culture, and our relationship to each other is going to be based on something that is independent and not based on the welfare handout racist assumption of the Department of Indian Affairs.
Part of a healthy community is a certain amount of control over the things that matter to that community. And as that comes, I'm utterly confident that there will be a diminution in the sorts of things that we're all aware of, the high welfare rates, the high unemployment rates, the suicide, alcohol, all these terrible things, which Indian leaders, of course, are more concerned about than anybody else.
Natives continue to blame the white man for their troubles, but the socioeconomic problems that have plagued the Aboriginal peoples for decades have given governments a reason to question their ability to manage their own financial affairs. But the man who speaks for chiefs throughout BC says it's time to bury the hatchet and begin a new relationship.
The reality is that what we're going to have to do is trust each other as citizens of the province of British Columbia to get on with developing this province for our benefit and for the benefit of our children, and stop fighting these foolish games that allow Indian people to be against non-Indian people and people across barricades to hurl insults. That doesn't produce any progress.
You're looking at what will be the world's largest gravel pit. It's part of the Seashelt Indian Band's reserve, and gravel is one of their main sources of income. Here is the biggest land development site on the Sunshine Coast. It too is owned by the Seashelt Indian Band.
The road gets on the nets and it makes it harder for the...
5 minutes away in a secluded bay, a salmon hatchery, run once again by the Seashelts. Each initiative is possible in part because this Indian band is self-governing. What does self-government do for you?
I think that the main things are that we have title to our lands. We are the ones that can make decisions in relation to leasing or whatever use we have on our band lands. We are also, another important part of it was that we are a legal entity. We don't have to get the consent or the approval of the federal government anymore.
This is what the wealth has brought them. A new housing development, each home worth more than $80,000 and financed through the band. But for others on the reserve, that price is too high.
I guess if you look at, go down and look at the other homes areas, you know, people that would feel bad about it or resent the person that is in there, and you know, why are they living in a $90,000 home and we're living in a sort of an old dilapidated house? But everybody has that opportunity to get into it.
And they've got to work for it.
Right, yeah, they have to pay for it, yes.
Self-government does not mean dropping all ties with the rest of the community. Seashelt natives go to school with non-native children. The harmony at work here can be seen in other areas, like the Seashelt salmon hatchery.
The main objective is to produce fish for the sports fishermen in the local area to create an inside fishery, as well as enhance the local streams back to their historical numbers. It's been a huge success since we started the transplant with the coal and Chinooks. We're able to see a lot of fish today jumping in the bay, people out catching them.
So far, self-government has meant healthy incomes for today's Seashelts. A new goal is to ensure there's something for the next generation.
We're free to do anything we want now. We can either make it or break it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.